Hi there and welcome. Today we're going to talk about consulting as a business model. So if you've ever been interested in being a consultant, or if you work at a company that has hired consultants or contractors, this episode will hopefully give you some insight into the mechanics of the consulting business, why businesses hire consultants, and some pros and cons of working for a consulting firm. Hi there, and welcome to the Jamie on Purpose show. This show is for the young professional woman who is aspirational and ambitious and wants to make the world a better place. We'll talk all things professional and personal development along our journey to being tomorrow's world-changing CEOs, government officials, and community leaders. Let's jump in. All right, welcome. Let's jump into talking about consulting. So first things first, what do I mean when I say consulting? So when I was in college, I guess was the first time that I was introduced to this concept of consulting versus industry. So I'll actually start with industry. When we say, you work in industry, that means that you work for and work at a company directly. So prior to college, this was the only way that I knew that you could have a job. It is you work for that company, they sign your paycheck, and you go to their office every day and you work on projects for that company. So that is what we call an industry job. You work specifically for that company. And then there's this whole other world of consultants or contractors, and there are businesses similar to kind of the businesses that hire industry people that are called consulting firms. And they hire people to then become consultants. And we'll dive into this a little bit more as to why a business would hire a consulting firm. But essentially what happens is for some reason, the business decides to hire a consulting firm, and that consulting firm has hired people who are consultants, and they get staffed on the project and they go work at that client, is what we typically call them. You work at the client. And so for however long a period of time, you work and go to the office of, if you're going into the office, and work on projects and work in teams that are made up of people who aren't directly hired by your organization. And so that's kind of when we talk about industry and consulting, those are the two different types of jobs that we're going to be talking about today. So my background, specifically my experience so far, has been for the last roughly 3.5 years. I have been an IT consultant or tech consultant, primarily around application development. So these are things like a mobile app or a website that we are building. There have been a couple of strategy projects that I've been part of, change management, that sort of thing. But primarily, both of the consulting firms that I have worked for have been around technology, building, custom development, that sort of thing. So when I, am talking about these things, this is based on my experience in that world. And in addition to that, my degrees that I got were essentially training to become a consultant. So I went to the University of Alabama, got my bachelor's and my master's in MIS, in Management Information Systems, which, if you're unfamiliar with that, essentially pick up computer science out of like the engineering college and drop it down in the business school. So my core curriculum was computer programming, general technology topics, but then the extra curriculum, I don't know what that's called, the basic stuff that we had to do was business, accounting, finance, operations management, marketing, that sort of thing. So what I realized looking back on it, even though it was a very technical, like my major courses were very technical, they were also built in a way where they were project-based, and we would have clients and stakeholders who were typically our TAs, our teaching assistants, or the professor, or that sort of thing. And we would have a project manager and those sorts of components and mechanics were in place to essentially train us on how consulting works, and that you have a client who is helping you to define requirements, and client communication is critical, and all of those things. And that was the majority of my undergrad. And then my graduate degree, I was the project manager for a semester-long project. We called it our capstone course. So it was 4 or 5, I think 5 undergraduate seniors on the project, and it was a semester long, and we had external clients. So for the first semester, it was actually the president of the university. Dr. Bell was our client that semester, and we spent all semester gathering requirements and building out a solution and meeting with him and presenting to him. And then my second semester was also had an external client, so we did the same thing. So, looking back on it, I was very well trained to become a consultant, to do what I am doing today, through my degrees and now through my experience. And I say all that to say that when it comes to the working world, this is all I have ever known. So I have never had a true industry job, big girl job. And so it was really interesting to me. Recently, we are interviewing for my day job, my consulting firm that I work for. And I was talking to someone, and they had never worked consulting. And the majority of the conversations that we had were around, how does consulting work? How does the mechanics of it, how I messed up some grammar thing in there, sorry. But essentially, how do you get paid? How do you define what projects are? How do you do all of that? And so I thought it would make an interesting conversation with us. So if you are new to consulting, if you have consultants in your business, like working within your business, and you aren't quite sure how they do what they do, we're here to talk about it. So let's do that. All right. So first things first, let's talk about the mechanics of how a consulting firm works, how it gets paid, how it gets hired, that sort of thing. So I mentioned this earlier, but there are businesses in industry, as we say, that hire consulting firms to work on a specific project. It's 9 times out of 10 in my experience, it is project-based work. We have a specific thing that we need your help on, and so we are going to hire you, consulting firm, to help us with this project. So consulting firm works with company, figures out all of those pieces that they want to do as part of the project. Say it's, build a mobile app for something. And then together they build out the SOW, the statement of work. And this is a contract. It's mutually agreed to as a contract that outlines what's the project, what's the timeline, what's the budget, all of that good stuff. So once that gets settled, then the consulting firm, who has hired individual people as consultants, will then staff the project at the client according to a variety of factors. But say I am working at the consulting firm, they say, hey, we want you to go work for this client. Next Monday morning, I show up and am working on this project for this client. So even though I work for a consulting firm and they are the ones who sign my paycheck and determine my benefits, and if I want to take a day off, they're the ones I have to clear it with, the vast majority, 95% of my time is spent with the client. So on the project, with the client, stakeholders and teams, and inside of their culture and their organization. So I say that because it is kind of funny. I have had this experience a lot since I joined the consulting firm that I'm with now. It's a startup. It's a little over a year old. I was employee number 7 here. And when I tell people that, they're like, oh my gosh, so cool, like a startup. Like, do you just like wear super casual clothes all day and like play ping pong like a tech startup, And I'm like, no, because my client that I've been working at is actually, 15 years old, and they have a whole staff of people who do all kinds of things. And that's the majority of my experience. Now, certainly I have pieces of the consulting firm culture that are part of what I do every day, but my 40 hours a week, 42 hours a week, 45 hours a week are spent with the client on the client project, and that is the majority of what I do for my day job, which is a really interesting paradigm if you're not familiar with the way that this business works. And we'll talk more in a second about some of the pros and cons of that. Another piece of this that is just part of the mechanics that I think is interesting and not something that I would have necessarily known is part of that SOW is the budget, as I mentioned. And the way that they get to the budget is they say, Jamie is this level sometimes, or they will say this is this consultant's hourly rate. And so each person who's staffed on the project has an hourly rate. And then based on the number of hours that they work, that is the amount that the company, the client, then pays the consulting firm for the consulting firm to then be able to pay their expenses and then pay the consultant again. That's one way that it's structured, is that called time and materials. The other would be a fixed fee, which has less to do with specific hours worked and hourly rate and that kind of thing. But that's I don't want to say typically, but that is a very common way that a consulting firm gets paid, is based on the number of hours worked by the consultants at the company. So they build the project for the certain number of hours that they worked. Their rate is agreed upon in the SOW. It's just multiplication at that point, and that goes to the consulting firm. It's then the consulting firm's responsibility to pay the consultant. So, if you're tracking with the math there's margin built into those hourly rates so that the consulting firm can pay their expenses and then pay the salary of the consultant. So those are really the mechanics of consulting, the big boulders of how does work happen once the business decides that they want to hire a consulting firm. So that takes us right into, why would a business want to hire consultants or hire a consulting firm? And as I mentioned earlier, typically it is on a project basis. So there's really 2 reasons why a business would hire a consulting firm. The first is the specialization of skills. So maybe there is a, cloud migration going on, and the people inside of your business have never done that before, but you can hire a consulting firm and they've done this 14 times already. And so you can trust them to come in and be able to knock this out and do it correctly. And they have certifications and all of that good stuff. So the specialization of skills, they are experts in the specific thing that you are asking them to do, and that's why you're bringing them in. Again, this also happens with the majority of the projects that I've been on, because it is application development. Those are things where we have pretty good structures. We can come in, we can build this out in ways that are faster, more efficient, and just more specialized. All of the good stuff that you get from someone being an expert, someone being a specialist in the particular thing that you are trying to do. So the second reason that a business might hire a consultant, again on a project basis, would be for what's called staff augmentation. So this is where the company has something already going, some sort of project is already underway, but they just need extra people who they can plug in and help to augment their existing staff to be able to work through the project faster because you have more people. So in both of these instances, the two things are at play. One of them is the flexibility. So it's really easy to hire a consulting firm for a short period of time, a couple of months, 6 months, something like that. And that is especially compared to hiring someone as a full-time employee. So if someone is needed, they do have your skill set that you're looking for. Are they looking to make this their forever job? There's all kinds of interesting stats about how expensive it is to hire someone full-time into your organization. And so consulting gives a way for you to get access to people who are really good at what they do. They have the specialization, but you don't have to go through the trouble of trying to find people who fit those criteria and then try to hire them on full-time, especially if you only need them for a short window of time or for one specific project. So the other piece of that is the pay. So because consultants typically are specialists, they are experts, they can command a higher level of salary. So that's pretty typical, especially when you look at like the big four consulting. Like some of the really big consulting firms pay a lot of money to their consultants. And then they turn around and charge a lot of money to the clients, or maybe they start by charging the clients and then pay the consultants. But that part of it is certainly top of mind for businesses, is that hiring consultants is expensive. And yet, in a lot of cases, it is not nearly as expensive as it would be if you were trying to hire these people who are this specialized for a full-time job within their organization. So slight deviation here from exactly what we're talking about, but did want to call it out because I think it's interesting. A pretty common career path for consultants is that they will go and work for a company as a client while they are a consultant, and they are there for long enough that they really understand the business and they really have connected with the people who are there, and maybe they're very aligned with the culture of the company. They've created really great relationships with lots of people throughout the company. And the day comes when that company says, hey, you know what? We actually do think that you are a fit for a forever job. Why don't you come work for us as an industry hire? And that is a common career path for consultants, is after they've kind of sampled several different clients, they've gotten to see different ways of doing business, to go work directly for one of the people, one of the clients that they were previously a consultant at. So wanted to call that out. It is an interesting career path. You can either go up the ranks of becoming a consultant where you become a leader in the consulting firm, or you go work in industry, or you go work somewhere completely different. But those are kind of your three paths. So, for what it's worth. The last part is why people choose to be consultants. So why did I choose to become a consultant, to work for a consulting firm? And for each of these things that I'm going to say, this is the best part of the job, and this is the hardest part of the job. So if you're considering becoming a consultant, this part is really interesting to listen to see both sides of it, because I love consulting and I think that it's a really fascinating business model and it's a really good fit for me. But not everyone will hear these things and get really excited. So listen up. In the, 3.5 years? That sounds right. 3.5 years that I have been a consultant out in the real world, I have worked at 5 different clients. So that is 5 different projects, 5 different problems to be solved, 5 different industries, like totally different industries with different trends and different regulations and laws and competitors. Just all over the board. All different, 5 different team structures. I have been on a team of 2 and I have been on a team of 20. And that has been a mix between all consultants and some that have been blended with client people and my consulting team. That's 5 different offices, so 5 different commutes, 5 different trying to figure out where the coffee is, 5 different badges to get in the door, 5 different parking lots, 5 different figuring out where the best place to eat lunch is, 5 different ones in 3.5 years. Plus working from home this go around, but that's, different than consulting. 5 different, client teams and stakeholders and internal dynamics or politics to figure out between the client people themselves. And to kind of encapsulate all of that, 5 different cultures. So we'll talk about that more in just a second, but wanted to give the full gamut of what all consulting in a short period of time has meant to me. And this feels very important to share with you. The stereotypical joke for consultants is we can answer anything with "it depends." So what I am saying, my experience is not typical, because there is not a typical experience. It always depends on what projects you get staffed on and all of that good stuff. So everything depends, but just for pure example, that has been my experience in this short period of time. So with all of that, you might begin to see why some people say that 1 year of consulting is equivalent experience to 2 years in industry. So just the sheer amount of information that you have to absorb and have to understand and have to parse through, and just the constant learning curves associated with that really ramp up your understanding and your breadth and your depth of understanding about how businesses work and how cultures work, and the problems to solve. Some of them are unique to a particular organization or business model or industry, but most of the time, if one business is facing that issue or that problem or that challenge, they all are. And so once you're able to identify which things are patterns across all businesses, that just helps you solve the next one that much faster, that much better. So especially early on, you don't have a lot of say in what projects you get on and how long you're there and, all of that stuff. So of the 5 projects that I've been on, didn't have a lot of say in where I was going to go, how long I was going to be there. The silver lining for that is, if it's a terrible project, then it won't last long. Here's the other side. If you're loving the project, it will likely end and you'll have to go to a different project that you might not like as much as your last one. So I mentioned it earlier, but really the biggest differentiator between different clients is their culture. So if they have a really great culture that you align with, this can be really fun and a really interesting experience to get to see how this company has their events and how they recognize their employees and do they give out swag and just really, fun things like that. Or are they not so great? Or in some ways, you're not aligned with the culture and the values and all of that. And one interesting part of culture, specifically when it comes to being a consultant, is how does that business treat contractors and consultants? Is it, you're going to be fully integrated and please take part in all of our events and you're part of the team? Or is it, no, we kind of like to keep you separate, so go sit in the basement? True story. I got all the way through this, and I'll tell you something. I've actually worked at 3 different consulting firms. I just remember my internship. That totally counts. So I've actually had 3 different consulting firms and 6 different clients. That's really interesting. I was also a consultant for my internship. So there you go. Just a little nugget. Maybe I'll just leave this right here. Or maybe I'll stick this somewhere else. But just for fun. Another part of kind of the pros and cons of being a consultant is travel. So because you are going to the client office most of the time, not in 2020 when there's a pandemic, but otherwise, you're typically expected to be at the client's office. And so that gets a little tricky because their location could be anywhere, really. So the consulting firms that I have worked at have stayed local. So the longest drive that I had was about 45 minutes. Right now, when I go into the office, it's about 15, and all of them have been within that range. But again, I have been to 5 different offices all around the DFW Metroplex at this point. And that is a very unique business model. It was very intentional by both of the firms that I have worked with to be local based. Lots and lots and lots of other consulting firms travel to their clients. So you'll hear kind of the joke of, maybe not a joke, the reality that consultants get on a plane Monday morning, fly out to the client site, stay in a hotel until Thursday, and then fly back home on Thursday, and then either work from home or go into their office on Fridays. So for my internship, I did not do that, but I had several people on my team who did. So it was interesting to see that experience up close. And that does not look like something I would want to do. That seems like a lot to do every week. But you're typically compensated really well for it because that is a not great thing. Hard to have work-life balance doing that. If you have a cool location that you're traveling to, I'm still jealous of the one project that my previous consulting firm had in London. Still wish I could have figured out a way to make that happen, but did not happen. So I was not flying anywhere interesting for any length of time. But if you like to travel and the consulting firm that you work with has interesting clients or has clients in interesting places, that could be a great thing for you. If you're not feeling flying or driving a whole bunch, and if you want a very predictable commute, like I want to be able to, live within 10 minutes of my office, then consulting's probably not going to do that for you. Unless everybody goes working from home all the time, which I highly doubt, at least for consulting. So with all of that, one of the interesting questions that came from that interview that I was in is they asked, what's the most critical skill for a consultant? And it's adaptability, 100%. It is being willing to learn and change and adapt, which is the same word that I just used, constantly. I have had, at least six first days of work in the last 3.5 years, even though I've only had 2 real different jobs. Because, you show up on the first day of a new client and a new project, and it feels like you're starting a new job because really you are. You had to drive somewhere new. You have to learn the project. You have to learn the company and the industry and a lot of times the technologies that are being used. And so when you are a consultant, you are signing yourself up to have that first week drinking from the fire hose experience often, way more frequently than you would if you were in an industry job and you're volunteering for that. And that's exhilarating to me. That makes me really excited because I love the challenge and I love learning and growing and figuring things out and figuring people out, getting to meet new people and, see what the dynamics are in an organization and where are the opportunities for change and all of that. That's a super fun process to me. And I am normally really, really exhausted after that first week. If you think back to your first week of doing anything, first weeks of school, first weeks of work, it's an exhausting process just because of the amount of information that you have to ingest. And I have raised my hand and said, I want to do this frequently because it's exciting to me. So something to keep in mind if you're considering becoming a consultant, that is quite literally part of the job description. All right, so those were the 3 biggest parts that I wanted to talk through: the business mechanics, why businesses would hire consultants, and an insight into the pros and cons of being a consultant, why you would be interested in it or why you might not be interested in it. I wanted to let you in on a bonus. I'm calling it a mindset secret, because this is something that is really important about being a consultant and being an effective consultant, is the persona and the presentation that you have. There is a higher level of professionalism that is expected from you as a consultant. And a lot of this goes back to often you are hired in as an expert, and so you are expected to be highly specialized and on top of things. And so you want to give off that air of professionalism, air of being an expert. So that's one way that shows up. The other is you're going to have a lot of touch points with a client, regardless of where you are. You could be a entry-level consultant, pretty new to it, all the way up to, the person in charge of the entire account. But no matter who you are, you're probably going to have touch points with client people, if not client stakeholders or executives. And in those interactions, you are a representative of your consulting firm. And if you mess it up, you could get your consulting firm fired. That's like the most extreme example. But if you make a really good impression, then there's the chance that you have somehow contributed to your consulting firm getting more work. And so when you have that mentality all the time, there really is a higher level of expectation that you should have for yourself, and certainly that your consulting firm has of you. So if you're interviewing, be on the lookout. The people who are interviewing you are probably going to be assessing your written communication. Are your emails really polished? How are your formal presentation skills? Would they feel comfortable putting you in front of the client to represent them? How are your informal small talk skills? Because sometimes those are even more important. And if that's interesting to you, or if it makes you like really nervous, go watch my other video on not answering people's questions and like don't do this during small talk. It's really interesting and it'll help you with the small talk thing. And so, during your interview process or when you are on a client, keeping in mind that professionalism is an expectation. The other way that this shows up really with, being on site for a client is it is an old adage that I have always heard that whatever the client's dress code is, the consultant should be one level higher of the dress code. So if they're in smart casual, you should probably be in pretty dressy smart casual or even business casual. If they're in business casual, you should be in business professional. If they're in casual, you should be in smart casual. So if those words mean nothing to you, I have a blog post. Go to jamieonpurpose.com/dress code, all one word. And that walks you through what all of those different things mean and how you can dress according to them. But that is a really important piece of the professionalism presentation, the persona of being an expert that you want to bring while you're being a consultant. All right, so if this convinced you that you now want to be a consultant or not, but you're still interviewing, I want you to be sure to check out the free checklist resource that I've made for you. So it is 8 tips to take you from unsure to unstoppable for your interview. And each of those 8 things can be completed in 5 minutes or less. So you can get it at jamieonpurpose.com/checklist. Thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next time.